Welcome to the third presentation in the series where we're addressing some very deep questions. Life, does it have any meaning? Is there a right way in life? How do we handle all the hard-going problems, persecutions, disasters, difficulties? And is there an ultimate destination and goal? What is life all about? And where are we going to find answers to these questions? We're looking at the logic of Christianity, and over this series I want to unpack the questions, the issues, and look at what Christianity says to see whether it holds any answers, any pointers, any direction. We're looking for clues. We're like detectives. And I suggested in the previous presentations we've got two starting points for our evidence, looking at the world around and looking at ourselves. What can we learn and what evidence can we gain that will give us clues and pointers to the answers to these really big questions? So we've got this remarkable universe. Whatever is true, it has immense complexity and power. But the scientists over many generations have discovered that it's governed by fixed principles. And ourselves? Despite being so different and so variable in cultures, backgrounds and time history and contexts, all of us share a deep sense of right and wrong. We are aware from early childhood of the concept of fairness, that which is good, that which is better. How do we explain these? And I suggested that the best explanation that we get is when we think of some kind of mind behind the universe. It didn't just all happen by chance. Now, if we go down that line, immediately this mind must be capable of immense complexity and power to be behind the universe as we know it. And equally, with this inbuilt sense of right and wrong, even imperfect, the Creator must operate on fixed moral principles. And that raises some real issues and questions for us, but gives us pointers to answers to our questions. There are fundamental questions. When we look at the world around, it does suggest a mind. When we look at ourselves, we can in part understand the way the world works. Where did that ability come from? Does that suggest a creator as well? And given our inbuilt sense of right and wrong, which those who studied this have found runs right across human history, races, backgrounds, there are slight variations within it, but there's a lot of common ground. Where did it come from? There's no evolutionary advantage that anyone's been able to point to. So how could it have arisen? Now, if we assume a creator mind behind the entire universe, well, I'm suggesting it does make a lot of sense about what we observe in the universe and in ourselves. We human beings are capable of two things: cognition and conscience. By cognition I mean the ability to have high-level thought. We can take decisions. We've got the capacity to understand, indeed the desire to understand. While we are aware of some kind of morality, it varies a bit. Sometimes it's suppressed, sometimes it's very acute. But we're aware of this morality, but we're also aware that we don't always match up to it. In fact, frequently, we fail to match up to it. Now, how can the possession of these characteristics in us point to answers to our questions? It marks us out as human beings, makes us different. It isn't easy to explain it by evolution. We have evolved as a life form on this planet. Indeed, without evolution, life as we know it could not have existed. It is a beautifully balanced mechanism. But it doesn't explain this. And it suggests that in some way, sometime, we humans were given something that's not shared by other creatures. Is that because God has implanted these characteristics into us? I want to look at the word love. Another characteristic of us human beings. The problem is in English the word has multiple meanings. If we go back to the Greek language, there were 4 words, all of which could be translated into English as love. I'm going to look at 3 of them. A warm emotional feelings that we have towards each other. I've put in the Greek words philia. Sexual desire for one another. Man for a woman, woman for a man. Eros, from which we get our adjective today, erotic. Agape. Now agape is different from the other 2 because it has no emotional aspect to it. Agape is a word of decision. You think of somebody else and you decide that your goal, your agenda, is to seek the best for them, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done, no matter whether they deserve it, no matter whether they can earn it or give you anything back. Now that word exists in the language, and we use the word love in English sometimes to mean that. Self-sacrificing love, if you like. Now sometimes that kind of love can direct our warm emotional feelings. That's good. Occasionally it can direct eros. But sexual desire is very often driven by the natural instincts that we've inherited in evolutionary terms. And it has to be there for good reasons to keep our race going. Let's just simplify this slightly and move it. How does it tie in with what we've got already? We have that inner voice that kind of points us to what's right and wrong, and sometimes almost points the finger at us when we do something wrong. And then there's the actual principles and practices of right living, right conduct, ethical morality, the standards of which there's a lot of common ground across all cultures and all races over history. It's inbuilt into us. Now our conscience can guide us so that we take the decision that we're going to do the best for the other person, even when it costs us everything we've got. Because that's what the word can imply. Self-sacrificial behavior. Even to those who have hurt us, damaged us, and to whom we owe nothing. And then that love can lead to ethical morality, where we start to behave towards each other, where we're each seeking the best for the other person. That is the ultimate of ethical morality, if you think about it. If each of us did that, and had as our goal the best for others with whom we have contact, the world would be transformed. So there are connections between these key ideas that help us. Let's go back to agape. Now remember, that's a decision. It's a decision very often that we are unable to carry out, even when we want to do it, but we'll return to that later. We're saying, my agenda is to seek the best for, and we name somebody else or somebody's else. Now where did that come from? How could it possibly arise? it's almost anti-evolutionary, because in evolutionary terms our goal is so that we can pass on our genes, thrive, prosper, and pass on our genes to the next generation. Why and how are we capable of that? What's its origin? I've called it self-giving love. These are interesting questions we've got to address. It's not easy to see how it could come. And even those who are arguing most strongly against the existence of God have admitted it's difficult to explain, and they've come up with all sorts of ingenious answers, but none of them seems to fit totally. But even if it did come from natural processes, why did evolution generate that? Doesn't fit the pattern of what evolution's all about, and its great power and importance. And that raises the question, is it possible that this has been implanted into us, something of the divine nature, into human beings? We'll leave that one hanging, and we'll see as we explore Christianity further, we'll see what the logic of Christianity says about that. There are many objections. You may have had some of you watch this series of programs. Can we overcome these objections? I've asked you to look at the evidence, not my opinion, not my assertion, not my statements. Challenge it. Very often religion has been called the God of the gaps, that we use religion to explain where we don't yet have an explanation, often from the sciences. So people argue, give it time, we'll get the explanations, and we won't need religion at all. How about imperfection? Sometimes when I watch television, I look out in the world almost in despair, given the disease, some dreadful diseases that make people suffer horrendously. The sheer brutality of the world, where today millions of people are refugees moving from country to country, trying to escape from brutal persecution, often at the hands of religion. The world is far from perfect. How can there be a good creator that allows for that to happen? And when we look at the universe, it's so vast. We're at one planet, a speck in an ocean. What importance have we got? Why is it so vast? And there are those who say that religions are just some kind of coping mechanism. They're just human inventions to help us cope with life. Is that true? It often is. And then the old question, who made God? Let's look at these questions a little bit further. This is by no means a complete set of answers, but I hope it provokes your thinking. Very often we've got to admit this, religion has been utterly irresponsible. And religious leaders down through the centuries carry a great responsibility for the damage they've done. They've used their religion to explain things that they didn't have an explanation for at that time. And they've used religion irresponsibly outside the area where religious ideas apply. The one thing that science always has to assume, otherwise it's impossible, is that the universe has some kind of order about it. It follows kind of fixed patterns. And it's tried to unpack these and explain the mechanisms, how it works. A religion looks at why, not how. And when religion starts to go into the how, it ends up in trouble. When science starts to go into the why, it is also irresponsible. I'm going to pick this up a little later on. If you give somebody freedom, and humans, we have free will. If you give somebody freedom, we take a risk. Because genuine freedom means that the person need not do it the way we want it to be done. And things might get messed up. And if we look at a large amount of the problems in the world today, most of them, not them all, are created by us human beings. And even the way natural disasters often kill people and cause great troubles, much of it is because we human beings have irresponsibly built in the wrong place, knowing that there's possibilities of problems, built in the wrong way, and not taken the world into account in our planning. God exists outside time and space. But those who have looked at the vastness of the universe and the sheer way it operates have suggested, and it's a possibility, that we need such a vast universe just for us to exist. Now that does not preclude the possibility that there are other life forms in great distance away in the universe, only we've no way either to contact them or to get close to them. But it's not quite as simple as we think. The whole question of time and space aren't as simple as we think. We are limited and bounded within time and space, but space-time is a concept in physics that has a somewhat different meaning. Let's leave that one hanging. The problem is that you can't say religions are a coping mechanism, because not all religion, indeed much religion, is not good. It hinders our coping. If you look at some of the religious rules that are imposed on people about what they eat, where they go, what they do, what they don't do, they hinder life. They don't help us to cope with it. And many religions have no real answers to the problems of sickness, natural disasters, and all the problems that we face in life, including the fact that all of us face death. But we've got to face the fact that human beings universally have this religious dimension in our way of thinking. We think in terms of something beyond ourselves. Where did that come from? The question is meaningless: who designed the designer? Who made God? God, by definition, is the ultimate self-existent one. And therefore the question's got no meaning. The only alternative is that the universe came from nothing. And that just blows your mind. Something from nothing? How? Why? It raises more questions than it solves. Now, if you look at humanity in general, there are two possibilities. Now, the majority of human beings are on the lower side. They accept the existence of some god or gods. It may be important in their lives or may be unimportant in their lives. But there are minorities who reject any concept of God at all. Now, if you take that line, one of the arguments that people put up frequently is, well, look at the world, there's so much evil and injustice. How could there be any God that's worth thinking about that would allow that to happen? Either he's not all-powerful, or he's a God not worth worshipping or pondering or even thinking about. But you see, if you take that line, we are capable of thinking about right and wrong, evil and injustice. Where did that come from? How did we get that capacity? It implies the existence of these. It implies something behind the universe. And you see, there's a logical absurdity here. If we believe the universe has no meaning, How can we state that if we don't have an idea of what meaning means? The idea of atheism is a logical absurdity. Now that may be harsh to say, but looking at it purely logically, people who have studied this, particularly philosophers, have noted it. But why do people cling to it? It's not large numbers. The vast majority of human beings believe in some kind of God. But why do people cling to that? But that raises a much bigger question. Let's look at the second part. Two possibilities. God is entirely good and rejects evil. I'm thinking of one God for the moment. Or God is beyond ideas of good and evil. Now that leads to the concept, the inevitable conclusion, that a good God created the universe, but the universe is separate from him. Whereas that line implies that God animates and is internal with the universe. The upper line is very much the line that's taken by Judaism, Christianity and Islam. The lower line is more often seen in Eastern religions. We've got to remember that Judaism, Christianity and Islam are all Middle Eastern in origin. Christianity is not a Western religion. Its origins are entirely in the Middle East. So we then say, well, where did the evil come from? And these three religions, in varying ways, accept that God made the world good, but something's gone wrong. But in Christianity, that is clearly taught. That human beings, we have a mandate. Not in our own strength, because we're not capable of doing it, but with him, to put things right. Let's go back to that logical absurdity. And let's broaden the question. In almost every religion and atheism, agnosticism, which means we don't make up our minds, is just a cop-out. A sign of mental cowardice. But why do people cling to any religion? It can be small numbers, it can be larger numbers. There's much in every religion that is irrational, and when exposed to the light of day, the evidence does not support it. Well, that's my conclusion, and it's shared by many. When it comes to religious matters or irreligious matters, most of us are not as logical or as rational as we think we are. There are all sorts of factors and pressures upon us that make us believe certain things or not believe certain things. Our upbringing is one of them. But sometimes it's power manipulation. Some leader, some ruler, could be within a family, within a community, within a nation, within a people group, wants power and wants everybody to conform to what they think. So in a sense, we're all forced, in varying degrees of pressure, to cling to the religion. Then there are broad cultural pressures. I remember talking to an Islamic man once. I had shared with him something about Jesus on a number of occasions, and he wanted to become a follower of Jesus. And then he looked at me with sadness, almost tears in his eyes, and he said, I don't dare do it. I would lose my wife and my children. Because in Islam, in all branches of Sharia law, There's an automatic death penalty for anyone who leaves Islam. It is most often not carried out. But what does happen is that the person becomes a non-person, ceases to exist. The marriage is annulled, and the children are no longer his. And probably he would lose his job too. Cultural pressures. Then there's self-interest. People belong to a religion because it gives them, let's bluntly say it, the backhanders, the advantages. And Islam uses that very strongly, because you won't get promotion and you won't get equal opportunities in Islamic states. And it encourages people to convert. So self-interest comes in. Then there are authority figures, religious authority figures, and they can put pressure upon us. And they can direct us into religious thinking, which may not stand up to any scrutiny looking at the evidence, but they're powerful in our communities. But overall, there's fear. We all face fear a lot of the time. Fear of being separate and apart from our culture and our communities, but also fear of life itself. Potential illness and disasters, so we have to appease the gods. Fear of what happens after death. So people do cling to religion for all sorts of reasons that go beyond logic or rationality. That's true. But that's also true. We have a capacity to distinguish, not perfectly, but to some extent, what's the interpretation. One is to say that in the universe, or in this world, there are two independent powers, good and bad. There's a kind of battle between them. We get caught in the crossfire. The other one is to say that the world here is inherently good, but something's gone wrong. But the memory of what is good is still here. There's so much good in human beings. There's so much wonderfully good in this planet of ours. But something's gone wrong. But a lot of good is still there. That's known as dualism. And that's the Christian perspective. Dualism is probably most markedly seen again in Eastern religions. But there are bits of both that appear in other religions. But the clear picture on the left is very definitely a Christian perspective. There's bits of it in Judaism. It's got slightly confused in Islam. But in its simple form, that's the logic of Christianity, interpreting the observed evidence. Christianity says God is one. He made the universe. He made this world and he made it good. But there's an evil power that encourages and orchestrates the evil in the world. This evil power is personal in some way. The Old Testament, which is also the Jewish Bible, describes him as Satan. In Hebrew, Satan, just an ordinary word that's come across into English. It means adversary. An adversary of God, and Satan gets at God by getting at us. Satan is seen as a created being, but a being who chose to go wrong, a spiritual being who chose to go wrong, with no physical manifestation. So you like, this world is kind of enemy-occupied territory because of his activities. That's the logic of what Christianity teaches. Now, believing that's right, which I do, doesn't imply that I reject everything in other religions. Other religions have got all sorts of really useful insights. But what I do suggest, and you may disagree with this, is that the insights from Jesus fit the observed evidence best make the greatest sense of ourselves in our world as it is. You may disagree with that, but I want you to come with me and look at the evidence I present and come to your own conclusions and judgment. But there's another problem. If we assume, which is the logic of Christianity, some kind of evil spiritual ruler on this planet, why does God allow this? Is it in accordance with God's will? It would appear that there only are two answers, yes and no. If it's yes, and if this spiritual person was created by God, why did God create evil? If it's no, then if God is all-powerful, which is the logic of Christianity, why doesn't God wipe out this evil person? The problem is this is a false choice. It's a false choice because it ignores one fundamental piece of evidence: the existence of free will. Let's just develop that a little bit further. You see, if we have free will, then we are free to choose to rebel. If we're not free to choose to rebel, then the free will is an illusion. It's not real. And we looked at that before. And that will include the spiritual creations as well as the physical creations ourselves. So free will can only be free will if there is the possibility of some kind of rebellion. That's the inevitable consequence of freedom of choice. It's true of you, it's true of me, and those of your parents have seen the truth of that in your children. You have to give them free will. They have to learn. And sometimes they will make choices that we grit our teeth. When they're young, we stop them. When they're teenagers, it's more difficult. But when they grow up into adulthood, we may see them making choices that we know from experience are not the best for them. But that's the nature of free will. That's an interesting thought. If you look at the alternative, which we'll touch upon in a moment, it's not a good alternative. God is the great risk taker. That's the biblical picture. That's the logic of Christianity. If you give human beings freedom of choice, we have the freedom to choose what is not good. If you give spiritual beings free choice, there's the same possibility. And without that freedom, these two things become meaningless. Taking a decision to seek the best for the other, if you've not got the freedom of choice to take the decision, then love has no meaning. If you have any kind of relationship with anybody, that comes from freedom of choice. Take away freedom of choice, relationship isn't there. And that's what it will become like. That's the alternative. Would you want to be an automatic machine, a product of evolution alone, driven by installed instincts? Now, evolution is wonderful as an explanation. It interprets so much, and our instincts are so important. But we have something beyond that. God giving us creation free will has consequences. Now there's an interesting thought. And if you look at the history of mankind, we have the enormous potential for the most wonderful achievements and the most horrendous evil. And with the development of modern media, we've become increasingly aware of this throughout the late 20th century into the 21st century. I'm going to finish this presentation with some interesting questions. You may want to take this away and ponder this. If you're in a group, talk it through. Discuss it and argue over it. That's true. That's the logic of Christianity, that there are spiritual beings given free will also. If this is something that God has given to his creation, is that also possible? But perhaps there are restrictions, different restrictions. The physically created universe, the world of mass and energy, it operates within the laws which God has appointed. The spiritual beings, I've called them angels, they operate within spiritual laws. But some use their freedom to rebel. And we humans, given this extraordinary freedom, if we decide that we're going to ignore the laws of the physical world, then sooner or later we'll have a serious accident which could be fatal. But we're also required to take into account the spiritual nature that's been given to us and the principles that underpin that. This broad area of question is worth pondering. The logic of Christianity has much to say about this. And in the next presentation, we'll look at the logic of Christianity directly into the insights from Jesus.